Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Several times this week, I've likely introduced you to some new words, if not new concepts. Unfortunately, today I've got two more, and that's what we'll be talking about today and tomorrow. The first word is sortition, and that's not a word that means anything spooky or supernatural like the other words this week. Sortition simply means a method for sorting things or people. It's how you group one set of things or people over here and another over there. There are lots of times when we might need to do that. Not long ago, I had to go to the Richland County Courthouse, into the office of the probate court, and I was intrigued to notice in the hallway a large clear cylinder sitting on its side with a crank on one end, and in the cylinder were thousands of little brown plastic objects. Suddenly I realized that that was an old jury selection device. You'd spin the cylinder and all the beads would be mixed. You would stop and draw for who would be on the jury. Everyone had an equal chance, and some were chosen. That's an example of sortition. The people of ancient Israel used a special kind of sortition called Cleromancy, which is an official name for casting lots in a certain way. You can simply cast lots to decide something, and that's just casting lots. What makes casting lots Cleromancy is when there is an expectation that God is involved in the outcome. One quick example that I'll remind you of that we talked about a few weeks ago. When the Hebrews came to the promised land, they cast lots to divide up the land by tribe, and then by clan, and then by family. Afterward, everyone believed fully that the land they received was the land that God intended them to have. God had fixed the lots to come out the way God wanted it to, the way Israel saw it. From that moment on, that land belonged to your family forever. There was a special case of this Cleromancy used in the Bible, and it involved the ephod worn by the high priest and two other things called the Urim and the Thummim. If you want to see those written, just look at the title for today's reflection. The high priest wore a special garment, and while no one is exactly sure what an ephod was, the best evidence indicates that it was some kind of apron or breastplate, and inside there was a pocket. In that pocket the priest carried the Urim and the Thummim. They were most likely two flat, rounded stones or bones, and each one had unique markings on it so you could tell one from the other. When an important decision needed to be made and you needed to know what God wanted you to do, you would go to the high priest, who would reach into the pocket of his ephod and finger the Urim and the Thummim until he felt led to withdraw his hand. And when he finally did, one of the stones meant yes, and one meant no. Since you couldn't tell the difference by touch, the high priest couldn't direct the one he drew out, and they believed that the result was that God had fixed it so that he drew out the one God wanted. It's like if you had a pair of dice in your pocket, but the pips or markings weren't indented but drawn on. You couldn't tell any difference between the two. The Urim and the Thummim were like that. Now, not just any question could invite the use of Urim and Thummim. Typically, they were only permitted to be consulted by very prominent figures such as army generals, the most senior of court figures, and kings. And the only questions which could be raised were those which were asked for the benefit of the people as a whole. For example, when the walls of Jericho fell down, the people were instructed not to keep any of the treasures inside. But a man named Achan did. and his sin affected the whole people. And they used sacred lots, the Urim and the Thummim, to discern who had done this thing. And sure enough, Achan was found out that way. There were other examples of the use of Urim and Thummim, but one of my favorites is one time when the Israelites were on the battlefield against the Philistines. They believed it was foolish to go into battle unless God had promised to be with them and to lead them to victory. The Urim and Thummim were used to find out whether to fight or to withdraw. In 1 Samuel 14, you find the story of King Saul with the high priest, and he can hear the noises of the approaching enemy and preparations for war getting closer and closer, and finally he could wait no longer, saying to the high priest, "Hurry up and withdraw your hand with either Urim or Thummim. We can't wait any longer." Again, this is called Cleromancy, and they really believed that God would direct which one was chosen. Thank goodness now that we don't have to have a high priest or two stones to find God's guidance. We have the gift of prayer. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.